Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is a tea from Miss Tea. It's a white blossom tea, which means it has white tea and it has flowers and herbs and stuff, and it's nice. It's a really nice tea. Had it for a little while, so I want to get on drinking that already. I've also had this wrap up in mind for a while, and it's taken me a while to get to. A couple of reasons. One is I just haven't been feeling great, but also when I've been feeling good enough to film, often there's been a lot of noise interference in the area. You'll probably hear some even today because there's some drilling going on, and I'm in a different spot. It's actually quieter here, relatively. But I thought I need to just get going, so I'm gonna do my best to do a nice, succinct wrap up of Victober. So I'm just going to talk about the things that I read for that particular event, Victober. Nothing, if I read something else in October, I'll talk about it in another upcoming wrap up, hopefully. There's a few books that I haven't spoken of about that I read in August and September, so I'll just be maybe a whole conglomeration. We'll see. So I'll just speak about what I was reading, and it wasn't as much as previous years. I have different reasons. One, I was away in the beginning of the month, so that slows me down a little bit. I got back, I was a little jet lagged. No, I was a lot jet lagged for like a week. Slow me down, not an excuse, a reason, it happens. But my thing is, did I enjoy reading? Pretty much for the month. There was no real disappointments, so that's good. My only actual disappointment was that I didn't read certain books that I had featured in my TBR, which would have been nice. But you can't have it all. I read a poem, The Lady of Shalott by Tennyson. It was the one I chose because I saw it so many times referred to in pre-Raphaelite art and thereabouts, and that's one of my things. And I've read bits of it, and I've seen, quotes from it before, but I realized I'd never sat down and read the entire poem. I'm glad I did. It was enjoyable. I'm not that big on the King Arthur time period or legends or whatever you want to call it. It's not really something I am extremely interested in, but I also am not completely not interested in it. So anything related to it, I don't mind. And I read, I had it here just a moment ago. Oh well. I read one story from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes because I wanted to read a short story. That was one of the challenges, and I read the A Scandal in Bohemia, which is one of the first of the stories that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote in short story form. And I don't know if it's one of my favorites, but it's definitely not a not favorite. So I like it. It introduces Irene Adler, who I think is really not referred to that much in the rest of Doyle's stories, but she's used a lot in further adaptations and or just different other writers' versions of Sherlock Holmes because, I don't know, she's intriguing, I guess. So why not? I did see one adaptation, and I did choose, I think it was the only one I watched actually during October, and that was of a Sherlock Holmes as well, but it wasn't the one that I read this time around. I watched the Red-Headed League, also of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. This was the Jeremy Brett version, the Granada from the 1980s, which is probably my favorite version of Sherlock Holmes still, though I like other versions too. So those were the non-novels that I read. I started some things, but I didn't finish them, and I'm not going to really talk about anything that I didn't finish this time, because talk about when I actually get to finishing it. But I read 3 books, completed 3 books that were Victober related, and here they are. All writers I have read before, and I would say my favorite was the 3 Clerks from Anthony Trollope, which I actually started in August. I was kind of reading it with my sister. She read a little faster than I did. I brought it with me on my trip to London, and I'm glad I did, because now when I think of the story, I have a fun thing to, connect it with, and it was a really good book. It was one of his standalones, though I believe there is at least one character that's introduced in here that will be in further books and novels, etc. So I'm looking forward to that. And it's just about the title. the three men who work for something, I think it's like some kind of government roles. I really do like that about Trollope, that he has like people with sort of office jobs. I find that relatable, even though it's usually men. But but it's something, the whole deal of commuting and sort of making your way into this situation, sometimes trying to find a better situation. And these three men, two of them are related, and one of them I don't think is, but they all are associated with each other. They either live with each other or work with each other, and one of them is kind of like all around good guy, I guess you could say. Maybe a little bland, but still a decent person. And the other one is more, I think, interesting, perhaps, but he's excuse me, got a little but he's a little ambitious. Not that it's wrong to be ambitious, but it's a little bit risky. And his saying to himself is "Excelsior" all the time, which is a little bit of a way of talking to himself. And you find out throughout the story whether or not it is good to reach out for certain things or not, and or is it not so much what you reach out for, but how you do it, that sort of thing. I don't want to give away spoilers, but I kept thinking of Stan Lee from Marvel Comics because he always said Excelsior, so that was like a little distracting to me because I kept picturing him every time I saw that expression. But that's just me. And then the youngest character he starts out a little bit all over the place, not really living in a most perfect way. Not that anyone is perfect, but you could tell he needs improvement. He gets himself in a little bit of trouble here and there. Honestly, I think he is the character that is the most interesting and the best development. And it's not just about these three men. It's also about a family of three women and their mother, and also I think a relative who comes to live with them. And they come to visit them very often. They live, I think, near Hampton Court area, which is not that far from central London, even then. And so it's a little cozy when there are those visits, but there are also, of course, relationship issues. You can imagine, do the math, 3 daughters, 3 Clerks. So I found it great. I found a lot of parts where I did actually laugh, and it was pretty solid. It didn't go on too long. It had the usual Trollope humor where he speaks to you as someone who almost can't control everything that happens in the story, like his opinions of things that he thinks should happen to people is kind of funny because he does have the ability to do that, but he kind of makes it almost in the sense that he is both the writer but also slightly outside of it. I don't know, there's something about Trollope that makes that work really well. So I totally love that book, and I don't think it's my favorite of Anthony Trollope's books, but it's definitely never going to be I keep saying something like that, but it's definitely up there. And this was a group, I think this was the chosen read for Victober, and I'm glad I read it because I've been trying to get back to Thomas Hardy, the mayor of Casterbridge, and this is one of the big well-known Thomas Hardy stories, so I wanted to get to it finally. There's only a couple left that I really have that I would like to read. I also have Jude the Obscure. A little terrified about that one because I've heard mostly negative about that in terms of just how messed up it is, like the story. And because of my dislike for the turnout of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, I was also aware of this one because I knew I'd seen the film adaptation or TV, whatever it was, a while back. And I knew it wasn't exactly the happiest story entirely. There were a lot of times where you're just like, oh, come on, people, just talk or just, be okay. But the title character, the mayor of Casterbridge, if you haven't read it, is a man. When he's younger, he and his wife and young daughter find themselves not in a great state, but he auctions them off to somebody. And I guess that happened in those days sometimes, but obviously it's not something that is looked on positively by both the writer or probably the readers. So he knows that he has basically a drinking problem, and that causes most of his issues. So he kind of gets off drink and he improves his life. Years later, he is the mayor of Casterbridge. He is a successful businessman. And then his past comes back and the story goes from there. And it's not just the past that comes back, but the future comes to town. And it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of sad. He's not super, he's not ancient. He's actually probably younger than me in the start, in the forward part of the story. But yeah, he continues to sometimes do things that are you wish he could just see sense or just communicate with the people he needs to talk to. But some things are a little bit out of his control, and at times I really do feel bad for him. Um, and there are other characters I find interesting. His Anyway, I don't want to give away everything spoilery, but I would say it's not, like I said, it's not the happiest of stories, but it's very well written, and it's not a very long book, so you're not going to be drawn out in a major depression. It does have hopeful bits, and it is definitely one of the Hardys that I can put up with. I do not hate reading it. I just felt a little bit like, oh, it's just not a happy feeling all the time. Last but not least, and I don't know which one I prefer, but I mean, Three Clerks is definitely my favorite of the Victober books, but I did really enjoy Mary Barton from Elizabeth Gaskell. The first, I don't know if it was half of it, does establish the characters and does establish the slightly depressing situation of a lot of the main characters, including Mary Barton and her father. There's a lot of sickness, a lot of death in this story, which sounds like it's going to be just one big depressing book, but honestly, it's not. It has relationship drama. It has legal dramas. It has a kind of a slight mystery to it, and it takes place mainly in Manchester. People working in situations that aren't ideal, and sometimes things don't work out, and they find themselves in a tough place financially. So this was I think it was a good story for Elizabeth Gaskell to choose to write, because it was a good way of raising awareness of how working conditions were at that time and how much of a struggle it was, and also the difficulties between the owners of the business and the workers, because some of the owners were people who came from less and they worked their way up, and sometimes that would lead you to have certain types of empathy for your workers, and sometimes you're more about your bottom line. So you do see different points of view here. It's not all okay, the owners are just horrible, tyrannical, uncaring people, and that the workers are all these amazing people just dealing with hard times. You do see nuances, and I did like that. Mary Barton is a character that grows on you in the beginning. She doesn't feel extremely developed, but as time goes on, she does develop character, and I would say backbone, and her love interests, because it's I guess plural, are interesting in what turns out, and her friends and neighbors and the people that not everyone is entirely just one, either really good person or really like saintly or wicked, and I like that, because it's not extremely humorous. There's very rare times where I laughed, and I think Elizabeth Gaskell has the ability to write books that are a little more lighthearted, not saying completely happy every minute, but she can also write these really sad things. So I think she is like, and not exactly, I know, you can't compare people perfectly, but I feel like if you took someone like Anthony Trollope and you took someone like Thomas Hardy and you combined them, you might get something like Elizabeth Gaskell, because you have some of the humor, maybe throw in a little Jane Austen. You have some of the humor that can appear in like the Trollope stories, but you also can have the deep tragedies that happen in the Hardy stories. I don't know. I really do like Elizabeth Gaskell, and I know that I have a couple more of her like actual books. Well, I have some short stories, and I definitely have Ruth left, which is probably not one of her happier stories too. And I also want to reread more of her books, because it's been a long time since I read Wives and Daughters, Cranford. I did read North and South pretty recently, so I can hold off on a reread for that for a while, but it was a great book too. So I thought this was a pretty good month, and I hope you agreed. And so I would like to, I have seen a number of wrap-ups already, so I know how some Booktubers months have gone, but let me know if you read anything in October related that was particularly appealing, If you have more goals to read Victorian novels, for instance, like you want to read more Trollope, you want to read some Dickens, you want to read Gaskell, Bronte, how about someone I haven't mentioned? There's so many. And if you have any further goals, or maybe for next year, let me know in the comments. So that is all for now. Try to keep it a little succinct, and I hope to be back soon with more videos that are related to Nonfiction November and my last London haul and other discussions, etc., etc. If you like these discussions, please subscribe. Thank you for watching. This is Catherine, Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.